Yes.
Or materialistic.
Yes. Yes.
Rather than focusing more on what what it says in the scripture.
Yes. Correct. That's a good analogy. If you didn't hear, what she was saying is that this is very much alive in the church in the spirit of relativism, or in the spirit of like the prosperity gospel preachers who are only interested in making you feel good and to focus on material gain for some reason, rather than on the real issues of the scripture, the real message of Jesus. And I think that there's something similar to that, yes. So this is the first reference in the New Testament about Noah. And the first thing it is from the life of Jesus, where he analogizes his second coming, so with the time of Noah. So I always said, I will start to get worried in this world when I stop seeing people going in droves to see the Holy Father at Mass, a papal Mass. I will start to worry when there is an increase a real increase, not just a small increase like we see today, of apathy about religion, the increase of the nuns as they're described, N-O-N-E-S, because right now there are a lot of people of faith around the world. And at the time of Noah, there was no faith. Jesus says this in the same discourse. He goes, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith? That's how bad it will get before his second coming. And frankly, I think it's directly connected with the cult of the Antichrist. What is going to replace faith is the worship of the Antichrist. That is what's going to replace it. So that's why when Jesus comes back to earth, everyone's going to be worshiping the Antichrist. Will he find faith on the earth? That's how bad it will ultimately get. So we look today and we go, oh, it's bad, it's bad. Yeah, it's bad, but it's nowhere near at the time of Noah, where there was no faith. There was no conversion. Do you understand what I mean? When you still hear of convertings, when you still hear of people coming back to the faith, then you know that we're nowhere near this end time that Jesus is speaking about. Because if we look at the story of Noah, he had no converts. None. Barely his family. And even then, afterwards, like I said, the grave sin that occurred afterwards. So it was far from perfect. Right? What's the next time we hear something about Noah? It's in the book of Hebrews. And it's one verse. Hebrews 11:7. It says, by faith, Noah, warned by God about events as yet unseen. Now I think that is an insight right there. Stop right there. Noah was warned by God about an event unseen. What is that event? The rain and the flood. This, I think, is an insight that the writer of Hebrews is telling us, because he knows the insights of the story of Noah. There was no rain on the earth up until the time of Noah. So that makes his obedience more remarkable. Noah, warned by God about events yet unseen, respected the warning and built an ark to save his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir to the righteousness that is in accordance with faith. Okay. Now, when I did my study in the book of Hebrews over 10 years ago, I spent an entire year of that 3-year period, if I'm not mistaken, just going over the book of Hebrews chapter 11. Each verse by verse is a reference to some hero of faith in the Old Testament. And each night I went over and explained the story behind it as to why this person was a hero of faith. And Noah is, of course, listed because of that reason. Okay. Now Peter In his first letter, Peter's the only other person, other than the writer of Hebrews and the Gospels, that mentions Noah by name. 1 Peter 3:18 through 22 compares the flood with baptism and how Noah was saved by his obedience to God. In the same way, we are saved through baptism. So now, watch this. For Christ also suffered for the sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. Did you hear that? This is such a rich letter. I would love to teach it, and I love Peter. But I love John a lot more. I would go to 1 John first. But I love Peter's letter. He's just a little scatterbrained for me, that's all. It's just his erratic personality. But that's why the Gospel of Mark is not my favorite gospel. It's too fast. The theologians say the most favorite word in the Gospel of Mark is and. And if you know Greek, the word for and in Greek is kai. So it's kai, 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 kai. It's like every other word in the Gospel of Mark is and. Jesus did this, and then he 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 said that, and then he did this, and then he did that. And it's like you're just going. It's one long, unbroken sentence. It's and. Because for Peter, everything is fast. And when you read the letter of Peter, he starts on one line of thought, and then it like shifts somewhere, and then it comes back here, and it comes back. There's like, it's a great letter, but there's like no coherence of thought. He's just free-flowing with his ideas. You love it. You just love it. You look at Paul's letters, and Paul is a man schooled in rhetoric. He's got a logical argument that he develops. This is why Protestants love Paul, and they don't like the Catholic epistles. Not because they're Catholic, but because they have this erratic quality to them. They're this stream of consciousness kind of thing. Well, Peter's letter is this way. I love it, it's rich, but it's like, it's not connected. It's like, Peter, stay on one track for me, please. So anyway, Christ suffered once for all, the righteous from the righteous. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in spirit, in which also he went and made a proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in former times did not obey God, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah, during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were saved through water. Okay, stop right there. You get what he's saying? Okay? He's talking about Holy Saturday and what Jesus did after his death. What did he do? He descended into hell, right? Now, it's not hell, it's the place of the underworld, where he preached to these spirits that were all the way back, even at the time of Noah, all of the unrighteous, to tell them that they are just, their sentence is final. Okay? And to preach to the Holy Spirits that were waiting for him to be released. That's what he did on Holy Saturday. Okay? But it says God waited patiently in the days of Noah. What does that mean? Noah was a preacher, and he was preaching, you know, God's going to destroy the world if you don't get it together. That's why I'm building this ship. And they all laughed at him. And then the flood came, and they were all killed. So who's laughing now? Right? Now, it says these 8 persons were saved through water. Did you catch that? Now watch, brace yourself. And baptism, which this prefigured, now saves you. Did you hear that? Peter says directly, baptism saves you. Not as removal of dirt from the body. It's not the physical washing like you would pour water over something, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God with angels, authorities, and powers made subject to him. By the way, authorities and powers, those are ranks of angels. Remember when we went over angels? Authorities and powers. This is one place in which they're named. So the point is, the flood of Noah and how 8 people were saved through the waters of the flood is in the same way how God saves you now, through the waters of baptism. So in this sense, when we read the story of Noah, we're reading about a rebirth, a renewal of creation. Just like baptism saves your soul by renewing your spirit. Are you following me? Yes?
I just wanted to say, we took through the 2 characteristics that marked that period, i.e. incest and murder.
Yes.
And as you were speaking, I recall, I don't know how true that is, that not all Noah's family actually went into the boat. One of his sons. So division is one of the characteristics that also mark that period. One of his sons did not. One of his sons, his family did not go to the boat with them. Of the 4.
He only had 3 sons.
He had 4.
No, he only had 3 sons.
7.
Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. He didn't have a 4th son, no. All right. No, I don't believe so. Okay. Shem, Ham, and Japheth, yes. So, this is another connection with what is the story of the flood. Now, also notice, Peter treats this story as if it really happened. Did you notice that? That people died in the flood and went to the underworld that they waited for until Jesus came. Did you notice that? He treats this as if this was real. Maybe it did happen. Ooh. It's not a fairy tale. Oh. That says something. Remember, we said that the first 11 chapters describe real historic events. It just may be in a poetic manner. Well, the flood was a real event. Now, do all the details necessarily have to be true? Maybe not. But the event did happen. So keep that in mind. Okay? So the church backs up the idea of the historicity, the historical part of the first 11 chapters. It's just not going to live or die on, did people live to be 900? You know what I mean? Okay? There may be some license in how the story was told, but the event occurred. And I would argue the event occurred. The flood happened. We'll hold that thought. The last part is 2 Peter. Peter's 2nd letter. This is very interesting. Peter gets a little feisty in his old age. I mean, he comes out quite strong. God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of deepest darkness to be kept until the judgment. And if he did not spare the ancient world, even though he saved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood on the world of the ungodly, and if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction and made them as examples of what is coming to the ungodly. Did you hear that? So, first of all, he puts all of these events in the same kind of category. He believed that the angels sinned and were punished and put into darkness. He believed that Noah was real. And by the way, this herald of righteousness, in other translations, it's translated preacher. Preacher of righteousness. So this gives us the idea that Noah was teaching or preaching or trying to convert the masses while he was building the ark. when he brought a flood on the world of the ungodly. And if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes he condemned them to extinction and made them an example of what is coming to the ungodly. What I want to point out that what you don't see here is the connection between Noah and Sodom and Gomorrah. The same thing kind of happens to both groups, which is why I pointed it out before. Guess who else makes the connection between Noah and Sodom? Someone whom we all know and love. Jesus does the same thing. He says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. He says also in that same chapter, as it was in the days of Lot, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. He equates the two events together. There's a reason for that. Peter does the same thing. Jude does the same thing in his letter. He connects this event together because this is post Adam and Eve, what the world was like and what judgment came, and post the flood, what the judgment came as a result. Both cases, all three groups do the same thing. Connect the two together. And in Peter, he talks about them being the same way. The world that brought the flood was ungodly. What caused Sodom and Gomorrah to be destroyed was ungodliness, was this turning away from God. That's what its chief characteristic of both of these judgments, is that they turned away from God and did corrupt things. In Noah's day, the chief sin was violence. In Sodom and Gomorrah, the chief idea was immorality. Sexual immorality, to be specific. And this was birthed when? At the sin of Noah, the seeing his father's nakedness. Ham seeing his father's nakedness. What was the sin that brought the violence on the earth? Cain killing his brother. It's like that seed was planted and birthed this orchard of violence on the earth. The seed that was planted after the flood birthed this orchard of immorality. You see what I'm getting at? Both cases. And Jesus uses